Hi, we're going to look at Dunning's OLI. So, what is all this about? Dunning talks about three factors that will help us to overcome some of the disadvantages of operating abroad. So, put simply, he's identified the advantages, and we're going to look at each of these in turn. The first one is around ownership. We have to start with ourselves first, and what is the advantage that we have? Well, clearly this is to do with the competitive advantage, and you can imagine what those advantages may be. They're going to relate to our core competencies and will include things like brand, or at least brand recognition in the host country that we're seeking. Do we have any superior technology? It has to be an advantage. So what's the superior technology that we may have? Do we have any patents, any intellectual property rights? And that will also include know-how, know-how about processes that are superior to others. So once we've got this competitive advantage, we're in a position then to think, where are we going to go? And so we're going to move from ownership to location. And when we talk about location, we mean the location of the host country. And in relation to the host country, it clearly these then are advantages that are external to the firm. You can see this is very similar to ideas of Ricardo and Porter's diamond uh, in relation to the competitive advantage of nations. You know, what are the factor conditions that enable us to see a site as located that can help us gain advantage? So what are we looking for in terms of that location? The obvious things are things like raw costs, raw materials, and the cost of those. Cost and probably availability as well can sometimes be uh, important. We have transport costs. Uh, we also have uh, other infrastructure factors. It may include things like uh, an educated population. It all depends on what our advantages are and how those fit with the location. And uh, lastly, and critically in international business, it's also around government regulations. What are the politics in that location? And often this is around incentives. So we have our ownership, our competitive advantages. This will get over the disadvantage of operating abroad because we have something superior. However, there has to be a fit with the location where we're looking for raw materials, costs, transport costs, government regulations. There may well be an educated population we're looking for, or it may be we're looking for low labour costs. There may be a whole range of advantages in that location, and this will be contingent on the business that we're in. And as you can see, there's a link between those two and Porter's diamond. So what is internalization? Well, this is that given we have a risk when we uh, cross borders, and this is one of the key aspects of internationalization. And given there's this risk, the question to ask is, well, why do we have to take the risk? Why not just license our brand or our product or our service and let someone else do it and they take the risk? Well, there's a number of considerations that work against that kind of argument. One of those is the cost advantages that can come from vertical or horizontal integration because it helps us to reduce transaction costs. So, for example, by vertically integrating, we don't have the transaction costs of going from supplier to buyer. The other aspect is that if we are located in that host country, then we may avoid tariffs and other barriers. Uh, this can't happen if we're doing business from outside. I mean, one of the examples of that is the car companies who came to the UK in order to use the UK as a launch pad into Europe. And finally, uh, the if we let go of our product and services and license it, then we lose control. And control over operations may be particularly important when it relates to intellectual property right uh, or, uh, or other superior technology. Okay, so we have three advantages, and what options does the company have when it comes to mode of entry? And just to remind ourselves as an aside, we have foreign direct investment, which may include international joint ventures, greenfield site mergers and acquisitions, and so on. We also then have the choice of whether we export. So uh, and finally, in terms of licensing. And you can see that as we go from licensing to FDI, we we gain more control. It is also more expensive, and so the choices uh, need to be made very carefully. And Dunning helps us in that. So if we have ownership advantage, and this is clearly very important, then we can ask ourselves, well, do we have any location advantage? If the answer is yes, there is a location advantage, and then we look at any internalization advantage, yes, we can reduce transaction costs, we need control over operations, then if we can tick all those three, then we're really wanting a FDI. We should keep control of it ourselves. But if we have, let's just change the color here. If we have ownership advantage and we have internalization uh, advantage, but no location advantage, then we are probably looking at exports. This would be the equivalent of, for example, a hi-fi manufacturer who owns superior technology. They want to internalize because they want to make it themselves, they want to reduce transaction costs, uh, but they can but there's nothing in the location because they're using high technology stuff which is sourced from around the world. Then exporting to agents who do the selling would be a viable option. And in relation to uh, a situation where we have ownership advantage, but we have no uh, location advantage, and we have no internalization advantage, then we may choose to do some kind of uh, licensing uh, deal. This can be around know-how, it can be to do with, thank you.